You're listening to Product-Led Revenue, brought to you by Correlated. In each episode, you'll hear first-hand advice and tactics from SaaS, sales, and revenue leaders about using product signals to drive expansion and revenue growth. Let's jump in.
Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Product-Led Revenue. I'm Breezy Beaumont, and this episode is brought to you by Correlated, a customer expansion platform for B2B software companies that focus on product-led growth. So today, our guest is Michelle Pietsch, Vice President of Revenue at Dooly, and she also previously worked at both Drift and Datadog. So Michelle, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks so much for having me.
Okay, and so to give our audience some background on yourself, do you mind telling us a little bit about your role at Dooly?
Yes, so I am VP of Revenue at Dooly. I manage the sales team. So we have a small sales team made up of account executives, as well as a BDR team lead and BDRs that are focused on generating and qualifying leads that are then passed to our account executive team. So my role today is really focused on hiring, putting the process in place because we are still pretty early stage, and in managing the sales team from, top of funnel all the way down to close deals.
Okay, great. And then for anybody listening, I mean, you guys are pretty loud on social media. I think at this point you have to know what Dooly is. But in case whoever's listening doesn't know what Dooly is, do you mind giving a quick background on the problem that you're hoping to solve?
Yes, absolutely. We have a very large brand presence, but I will say some people still ask us, what do we do? So we really help organizations that are struggling to get accurate data into your CRM, specifically Salesforce, that helps you lead to better data to understand what your forecast is, where your team is struggling, where you can spend more time coaching your sales reps. And then other times people come to us if they're struggling to get their sales teams to adopt a consistent sales process. So anyone that's leading to longer sales deals or lost sales cycles or lost deals, and you've implemented, for example, Medic, and no one has adopted Medic, and you've spent all this time and money, that's where Dooly comes into play. And really for sales leaders, me specifically, it is easier for me to roll out a process and understand what my team is doing, knowing that they're all doing the same thing or relatively the same thing. And that's where Dooly comes into play. So we make it easier for your team to focus on actually selling, and we remove all the noise and the admin work so they can actually do what is expected of them in their day-to-day.
Awesome. And on the website, there's a get started button, and you can kind of click right in and start using Dooly. Do you mind walking me through what that process looks like for the end user?
Yeah, it's super easy. You'll find more benefit using Dooly if you have Salesforce. So we ask that you connect to your Salesforce, which is relatively easy. You just simply give us approval and you get logged on. And then you get through a 14-day free trial. And we have an amazing onboarding program through our Schoolie with Dooly and our enablement team. So if you do need any help, we're there, but you'll get hit up by one of our BDRs or our enablement members who will help get you set up if you do need help. It is relatively easy though. So you log into Dooly, you can then see everything that you have in Salesforce. You can create a pipeline view, you can create playbooks and templates. But throughout the 14 days, you're not going to be left alone. We're going to be walking you through that 14-day free trial and making sure that you're up and running and seeing the success that you need to see in order to see Dooly's value relatively quickly.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm really curious to jump into that process a little bit. But before I get in too deep, I would like to hear a little bit about your team and how your team is set up today, from AEs to BDRs to customer success, and how you've thought about scaling that team as you bring in new members, kind of like what are the different ratios and things that you're keeping in mind?
Yeah, absolutely. One thing I want to point out, we haven't actually been selling for a full year yet. So I started at Dooly March 1st of 2021, and that's when we started building our sales team. So it hasn't been very long. And when we started in March, there were 2 sales reps that were there that started with me. And we were very much in the learning mode of understanding what our customers like, what they don't like about the product, because we were very much like building from the ground up at that point, and we still kind of are. So we needed to understand first, what does this actual sales cycle look like? what does the process look like from lead to qualifying call to demo to close won deals. So before I added a ton of people, I wanted to understand what our users were saying and how we were delivering that value really early on. And that starts with the product. So understanding, what do they like about the product? Is it easy to use? And you do that by listening to sales calls, listening to what your customers like and don't like. And we then developed an understanding around, okay, we need to have more of an outbound strategy on top of the inbound leads. So with those two account executives, we were doing the standard inbound leads, qualification, demo to close deals. And then we developed in August our first SDR team. And we hired an SDR manager first, selfishly, because building out a new SDR motion and then managing and building out an AE team was pretty hard. And it's not my first rodeo. I've done it. So I know. And I selfishly wanted to put a lot of effort and focus on the BDR side. And hiring the manager before we hired the actual BDRs was a little risky, but we were able to ramp that team up relatively quickly. So I think my experiment there actually worked, because our SDR leader is amazing and he built out a team and a process relatively quickly, as opposed to would have taken a lot longer. So we have that team, and then our account executive team that is focused really on closing and our outbound process. And then our CS team is made up of a director of CS, and they're focused on customer health, onboarding our customers, making sure that they have everything that they need in order to be successful throughout their, dually lifespan as a customer. And then part of that team is our enablement team and support, where they're doing a lot of educating on our side of what dually is and how they can actually see the value relatively quickly. As opposed to leaving our customers in the dark, we want to be able to give them a resource and a guide and as many videos and how-tos and actually people to reach out to. So that's part of the CS team.
Got it. And is there sort of, have you divided it up? I know you still have a small team today, so maybe it's just sort of like everyone's tackling everything. But have you divided up today, or are you thinking about dividing up both the AE team, like maybe thinking about doing that based on a territory or based on if they came inbound or if they're more focused on outbound accounts? And then same with on the CS team, if you have any insights there on how they're thinking about maybe, your enterprise accounts versus maybe a smaller self-serve inbound company that came in.
Yeah, absolutely. So as we started to close some of our more significant deals over the last few months, I did segment our BDR team out, and I keep switching BDR and SDR, and we call them BDRs, but that was a debate between the BDR manager and myself. So I have to continue to call
We
them
have
BDRs.
SDRs here, so
I did
they're
split.
the same idea.
Yeah, yeah. Like, whatever makes you happy, just qualify leads. So our BDR team, I actually segmented them out because we were seeing a lot of traction with smaller organizations really early on. And I'm talking 2 or 3 seats. And we also have our account executives who are focusing on closing much larger, more significant deals. And it didn't make sense for my AEs to focus on really smaller deals at the time, because they had so many other things on their plate. So I segmented our BDR team to also close deals anywhere below 50 employees or below. And that made sense at the time, because they had enough bandwidth to also manage those smaller customers. And I'm happy we did, because our net new logo has gone up because of that. And our account executives have actually started focusing on that more significant play. We will then start to understand what our customer base looks like as we start to go up market, which is our focus area for 2022. And we are starting to see more significant enterprise rollouts, which means we'll have to start to hire and understand what that motion looks like. And that's where the segmentation comes into play. So the idea of the BDRs also was to build a bench for more of a junior account executive role, so they can handle more of an SMB focus. So constantly building that bench on the BDR side. When we're ready for that segmentation of the SMB team, we'll pull some of those BDRs up and they'll manage those smaller accounts. And we'll do a mid-market and enterprise play. And the same thing goes for our CS team, where we have our CS enablement managers focusing on those smaller plays. So it's not as much of a hands-on approach, but you have someone that's going to be there to support you, but it's not multiple calls over 90 days. And then we'll segment the CS team to focus on mid-market and enterprise. Now, our CS team with any enterprise deals that we close, it is a relationship that starts to build since day one, and it spans over 6 months of I'm going to be your go-to person. It could be anywhere between 2 calls or 20 calls. We're going to be there to support you on that enterprise side, because you move forward with that enterprise tier, and that enterprise size organization expects that and deserves it when they move forward with someone like Dooley.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. It's all about making the customers happy.
Exactly.
One of the biggest things I love about the product-led growth world is that the customer gets the choice in so many different steps in that journey. The first one being on the website, being able to choose, do I want to get started and check out this product right now? Would I rather click the demo button and talk to a human? And then at any point in that process, can I get human help or get different resources? And so it's clear that you guys have been putting the customer first and thinking about building out all these different processes.
Absolutely. That's super important.
Yeah. So one of the next things I want to get into here is on the sort of like data and insight side. And so really, like, what does this process look like, right? So someone signs up. Let's do it through like the product sign up side. So they OAuth in using or go in through Salesforce and sign up into Dooley. And then can you walk me through a little bit of that process? So is there enrichment that's happening? Is that dropping right into Salesforce, into your CRM? And then how is your team getting notified on that?
Great question. And it's a work in progress, to be honest. So like I mentioned, Dooley, we are a very small organization right now, and I'm super data driven. So I'm constantly asking for more data, and I want as much information in front of the sales team as possible. And more importantly, our CS team, to understand our customer health and what are those customer health metrics look like. So we use Looker, and we are currently trying to pull all of that data into Salesforce so we can accurately report on it more on the sales side. But we understand when someone is sticky within the product. So it could be a number of playbooks that they've created or a number of logins. We know after a certain amount of time that this person will most likely be converting into a paid plan, or they're sticky enough where they have seen success of using Dooley and they've logged X amount of notes, or they've updated their pipeline X amount of times. So we are using a lot of data analytics on the back end, and we have an amazing data analytics teams that are constantly updating us with where we should focus our time. And also a lot of that goes into pricing and packaging. So we're working on our pricing and packaging right now and trying to understand what is going to benefit Dooley, but also how can we appease our prospects and our customers to make it easier for them to understand what tier they actually fall into. So it's not a trick. And previous organizations, we've been able to understand if this customer creates X amount of dashboards, there's an 82% chance that they will convert to a paid plan. But then when they get to that paid plan, what's their lever to actually go from the free version to medium or enterprise tier? And that's where all of those important data analytics comes into play.
Yeah, I think that makes a ton of sense. And I definitely want to talk a little bit more about pricing and sort of where you guys are headed there. One thing quickly before we jump into that though. So where is your team logging into today, or do they all individually have Looker licenses to see how people are using the product, or is that more of a wish list item for you all today?
So the CS team does. I'm hiring an account management. I'm building out an account management team as well. So they will have Looker logins. The AEs do not. It's really just a matter of trying to reduce as much noise for the account executives, to be honest. I don't want to throw another tool in front of them. So we have the ability to show them, and our CS team is amazing, and they'll give us a heads up if they see something. So it's not necessarily a wish list, but I'd like for us to actually pull it into a view for that's easier for them to see. Probably a wish list to have it into Dooley so we don't have to go into Salesforce. But for me, I live in it, and my RevOps leader, we look at that data all the time. So we have the indicators to ship to the team.
Got it. Yeah, makes a ton of sense. A lot of the teams that we end up talking to over at Correlated are, if they've built it out to a certain degree, a lot of them do have their team, logging into things like Looker and Tableau. But I will say that they are definitely looking for an alternative to that if that's their current setup. Just knowing how a salesperson works, and clearly you would know this, is that logging into a Looker dashboard probably isn't an ideal day-to-day process. Just like,
Yes.
how Dooley is enabling Salesforce, we probably need an enabler like Correlated or something on top of these other data sets. So same idea.
Exactly. Something that's easier, because been there, done that. I've given the team Looker licenses and all these tools, and they don't actually use it. So anything that's easier for them would be great.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Okay, and then the other topic that you started to get into a little bit is pricing. So I'm curious, how is your pricing set up today, and what you're willing to share there? And then sort of what's that vision for the future?
Great question. Currently working on that. We want to do the right thing for our prospects and our customers. So doing a lot of research, and I personally don't want it to be a trick, right? So listening to a ton of sales calls over the past few months and when we're pitching our pricing, you have a lot of, well, why do I fall into that bucket? And is it the sales rep that is positioning them into this specific bucket because it's going to make their commission higher, or is it best for the customer? So I think it's understanding what levers you have to pull. And it goes back to that data question that you asked and what we look at. So what's the key piece of the platform in each specific tier that you think that the prospect will benefit from when they pay for it, as opposed to, well, you have X amount of employees and you automatically fit into, this specific tier, but you don't actually need 10 out of the 10 things on that list. You only need 2. So when we look at that, we are actually looking at the usage and what our prospects are actually doing and our customers are using to make that call. I also weary around our free tier, because a lot of account executives use Dooley and they're using it for free. And we don't want to necessarily take a lot out of that so they don't continue to use it, but we want to create a tier that is beneficial for them, but also more cost effective for them. So something that's a no-brainer, and understanding what that one lever could be for them to move to a paid plan as opposed to free. So there's a lot of conversation about it. There's a ton of research that goes into it, but as opposed to some previous orgs that I've been at, we change our pricing way too much. I don't want to do it every quarter, because that's also, in my opinion, it's harder for the sales team to have a conversation with someone today and say, our pricing's this, and then every other quarter it's constantly changing. So it's really about what the customers and what the data says.
Yeah, makes a ton of sense. I've been on the other side of when you get some pricing whiplash, and it's always one of them actually worked out very well. They cut their price by like 90%, but it was still a really bizarre buying experience when you're working on getting budget, and then
Yeah.
all of a sudden 90% of the cost was just chopped off.
That's very rare, I can tell you that.
Yeah. I think that was the result of maybe some poor acquisition, but that's all right. I would love to dive into Datadog, though. I mean, knowing this is a product-led revenue podcast and your experience over there, there's no way I couldn't bring that up on this call. I'd love to just hear about sort of like your experience there in your role, kicking it off, and then also like, some of the things that really stick out to you. Was that your first experience in the product-led world?
Yes, it was. And I have never seen anything like Datadog after that. So I started Datadog in 2013, where there were only 3 sales reps. So I was there really early on and saw the power of PLG at Datadog before I think PLG was even like a thing, to be honest with you. We really nailed it with the developers and DevOps and the engineering space, where we made it easy for them to see value in the product without actually having to speak to anyone. And if you're selling to DevOps engineering, you know that they definitely don't want to hop on a sales call. So it was easy for them to log into the tool, to see value. There was very little friction, if any. And they were able to get to an aha moment within the 14 days of that 14-day free trial. There was, very little lift for them to see what Datadog would actually add to their tech stack. And also it was pretty minimal in cost for them to actually get started. So at the end of the 14 days, you didn't necessarily have to talk to a salesperson. You could put your credit card in and then get started. And the key with Datadog, which I haven't really seen much after, is you didn't have to, there was very little friction. Like, you could continue to use it. And the fact that they saw that value seamlessly, immediately, is really hard to do, because I've been at two, Dooley's a PLG organization, and so isn't Drift, but I really struggle with the PLG term in some senses when it comes to, it's very much sales led, because my sales teams at both organizations needed to be there as there was some friction, or we have some friction on the Dooley side as well, where people are raising their hand, asking a lot of questions about, how does this work, how does that work. At Datadog, we didn't see that, and that's what made it so powerful, and it made it so easy for them to put their credit card in.
Yeah. What was that like, being in the sales org at one of these, PLG is maybe starting to become a little bit more mainstream, or at least talked about now. There's been a bunch of companies doing it for a while, but now everyone seems to be talking about it. But I mean, what was that
Right.
experience like, being early in that?
That's a great question. It was exciting because you could see the value that the product you're selling is resonating with individuals very quickly, as opposed to going through these daunting discovery calls and, the old school Sandler pain funnels for people to actually understand the value that your product is going to give them. It was refreshing to see people like, yeah, this is great. I just created 9 dashboards, and just send me the credit card link, which everyone would love. But like I said, a lot of the organizations today that, talk about PLG, you have a sales team that's grinding it out and doing some type of discovery. And being at Datadog really early on, it was awesome. It was really exciting to see that. I don't want to say the opposite, because it's, we still needed to do a lot of discovery and pain qualification, but the ability to see that, like, ease of use on the customer side was really refreshing.
Yeah. Are there any kind of experiences at Datadog or Drift that you've thought of and have brought into what you now do at Dooley, I guess, where there's some lessons learned, or either good or bad things to look out for and bring into your next role?
Yeah, I think the most important thing that I took away was the ease of use and seeing the value of your product really early on. So the fact that you didn't necessarily have to take 3 or 4 demos to walk someone through Datadog before they bought was amazing. So how can you replicate that in any other sales org? And that's not easy. It really depends on the product, and can they get to that aha moment without necessarily having to go through multiple demos. And we are still very much learning how to do that at Dooley. And at Drift, we didn't necessarily have to go through demos, but we needed to help them get set up in the product. And it worked out well, but we still needed to take that time. And time is money, right? Not to sound cliche, but if you continuously make your product more complex and they can't get to the aha moment and see the value, then it's going to be more work for your sales team, which means longer sales cycles, more competition is going to come up and get in your way. So that's my biggest learning, is just ease of use, listening to your customer and trying to figure out how to make it as easy as possible for them to actually buy, remove that friction.
Awesome. I think that's great advice. I'll definitely take that. I think probably a bunch of our listeners will also take that one to heart. We're coming up on time. A couple quick questions. Are there any changes that we should be aware of in the Duly product going forward? Any new features or updates or things we can get excited about?
We have a lot of exciting things in 2022, and I think it's going to be more powerful for managers, so sales managers, to get in Duly and not only help their team and understand what's happening with, their deals and their sales force, but the ability to coach more and understand how to move deals faster and not lose deals. So we have a lot of great things coming, and I'm really excited for what we have in store because we just closed some significant deals over the last quarter, and it's going to pave the way for what Duly has to bring in the coming years.
That's great. And where should people go to learn more about you and to learn more about Duly?
I'm on LinkedIn, so Michelle Pietsch, I'm VP of Revenue at Duly, and then check out Duly.ai. We have a 14-day free trial. You can hit me up on LinkedIn. I'd be happy to set you up with the trial and put you in touch with a member of the team to walk you through how we can help you.
Awesome. Well, Michelle, thank you again. I really appreciate you spending some time with us today. It was great having you on Product-Led Revenue, and I look forward to keeping in touch.
Thanks for the time. It was nice chatting.
Thanks for checking out this episode of Product-Led Revenue. This show is brought to you by Correlated, the first platform built for product-led revenue. If you enjoyed what you learned in this episode, make sure to follow the Product-Led Revenue podcast wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts, or visit getcorrelated.com/podcast to get access to all of the latest episodes.